Good evening. Welcome. My name is Pat Kowitzel, and I'm the buyer and author program coordinator at Magic City Books. And I want to welcome everyone that's joining us tonight, or if you happen to be catching this later on down the road on our YouTube channel, thank you for spending a little bit of your time with us and learning a little bit more about the work of our authors this evening. We are coming up here at the end of 2021, and this is going to be our final virtual event of the year. This is a year that we, at the start of the year, we hoped that we would be doing a lot more in-person programs. And then as it turned out, we wound up doing mostly a virtual year again here in 2021. And it's been able to provide a unique opportunity to kind of be able to connect authors. And so tonight, while most of our audience may be in Oklahoma or regionally in the Midwest of the United States, our two authors that are going to be in conversation tonight are joining us from really halfway around the world from each other. Stephanie Scott is joining us from London tonight, and Laurie Frankel is joining us from the West Coast in Washington State. And so we're really excited to be able to bring these two authors together to have a conversation and discuss, they're really wonderful books. Stephanie is a debut author of the acclaimed novel, What's Left of Me Is Yours, set in modern day Tokyo and inspired by a true crime. It charts a young woman's search for truth about her mother's life and murder. And joining Stephanie in conversation will be novelist Laurie Frankel, whose most recent book came out earlier this year, 123. It is a laugh out loud, one-page grab a tissue on the next novel about expanding our notions of normal and making the world a better place for everyone. These are two books that are favorites of ours at Magic City Books, and we couldn't have been more excited to have the opportunity to put these two in conversation with each other for our audience tonight. We will be having links to buy both books in the chat, and so kind of take a look for those as we're going along, or if you're joining us over on Facebook, those links will be available in the program description. And check out magiccitybooks.com for our upcoming events and other things that we have going on. We've got quite a few in-person programs that are getting scheduled for 2022, and we're going to be adding a lot of those in the coming days and weeks, but we're looking for a really great February. And so we're really excited about that. Thank you all again very much. If you're not in the Tulsa area, we wish you a happy holidays. If you are in the Tulsa area, we hope you stop by the store before the end of the year and we get a chance to put a few books in your hand, and including Stephanie's and Laurie's. And so without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Laurie Frankel and Stephanie Scott. Ladies, have a great evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pat.
Thank you, Pat.
That's great. That's really great. Okay. Hi, all. We can't see you, but we're thrilled that you're here, and we can feel you. We can feel you through the computers, I think. I just want to welcome everyone. I also want to say I loved this book. I read this book. God, Stephanie, when did I read this book the first time?
Goodness me, it must have been 2 years ago.
Yeah,
now?
It was a long time ago. Yeah, and of course the world has changed in the interim,
yes.
Which doesn't usually happen. I read a very early copy of this book and loved it then, and then I read it again to do this event tonight, and I loved it still. Which I was saying before you all joined us isn't always the case. Sometimes you read a book the second time and you're in a different place because the world has changed and it feels different. But this one I loved both times. What I don't know is whether the people who are attending have read the book yet or not. So often when you do a hardcover, it's only been out for a day, so nobody has read it yet. I think people might have read this. So I would like to invite everybody to ask questions. I'm going to watch this little Q&A box at the bottom of my screen. I have lots of questions, of course, but if you have questions, I would love to ask them. And I think it's really different talking about a book that you haven't read yet versus a book that you have read. So I don't know if people have ideas. We want to know what they are. Anyway, thank you for doing us. Stephanie, it's so nice to meet you.
It's so wonderful to meet you, Laurie. Thank you so much for being here with me. It's so exciting. I've looked forward to this so much.
Yes, this is my last event too of 2021, and I feel like it's been a long time coming.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. God, what a year. We could
Yes.
not have anticipated it again,
No.
like 2020.
Yeah.
And
Oh.
no, God. And as we were discussing a bit beforehand, you know, I've just had a baby, so
Yes.
it's really lovely to be able to step back into professional life and talk about literature and reading and books again.
Yes, I mean, I think we should also point out to people who are watching this that it's 1 o'clock in the morning where you are, and you just had a baby, and look at you. You look like the middle of the afternoon. You just stepped out of a salon. It's most impressive.
Oh, thank you.
You look very rested.
Thank you. Well, it's, you know, pajama bottoms on the bottom.
And as well you should do. That's the beauty of the Zoom book event, I think.
It is. Sorry, everyone.
No, you shouldn't apologize for that. Actually, I feel like from now on, everybody should wear pajamas to book events.
Well, the book actually, the novel actually came out in hardback in the first lockdown in England.
Oh.
And so, you know, instead of, we only had like a week's notice actually before the whole world just shut down. And so instead of having a launch, I did one online and, you know, I did that in this room where I wrote the novel and in my pajamas in which I wrote the novel as well. So.
Which is really appropriate in a lot of ways.
It is.
Later, I have lots of questions about process because everybody's process is always really interesting. But for starters, in case people haven't read the book, you want to pitch it to us? You want to introduce us to this?
Sure. Of course. So my novel is set in Japan and it's inspired by the Japanese marriage breakup industry. So Japan has an at-fault divorce system, like many places in the world. But if you want to divorce your spouse, but you wish to retain custody of your children or a greater portion of your assets, you can hire someone to seduce your partner and provide you with grounds for divorce. And and this is what happened in the true crime that inspired my book. A Wakare Sasea, a marriage breakup agent, fell in love with the woman he was supposed to seduce, his target, and she fell in love with him, only she found out the role he'd played in the breakdown of her marriage. And when she tried to leave him, he strangled her. And it was this crime that really sort of took hold of my interest, mainly because when the perpetrator, and in the true crime it was the agent, when he was arrested, he swiftly confessed, but he kept saying to the detectives that, you know, that he loved her. He kept saying, I love her still. And I wondered if that could possibly be true, you know, if you could love someone and kill them, because I was newly married at the time when I was reading this, but also also, you know, love in its ideal form is selfless. And I started to think about what love means to each of us, and Tolstoy's idea that there are perhaps as many different kinds of love as there are people, and how our own survival can hinge on another person, and how we love, what we're willing to do for love, is really where the novel began.
Yes. Yes. Okay. I mean, I almost feel like I have so many questions that aren't related to your book that are just related to the topic, so I won't do too much of that because we got to get to the book. But I had never heard of this until I read your book. Is this something that you knew about, or how did you come upon this story? Because indeed, as soon as you hear about it, your brain starts turning with all of the possibilities. That this wasn't. At first, I thought, oh, this was just a really weird, like this weird dude who hired this weird dude. But no, it's a whole industry. It's astonishing.
It is. It is, and I didn't know anything about it when I first read the article. But I sort of flew to Tokyo and I met with Richard Lloyd Parry, who's the Asia editor of the Times, and he was covering the trial and the case. And he was very kind, and he was kind enough to share his notes with me and talk to me. And you know, I always wanted to do, I think, a very fictionalized version. So I've actually moved the crime 20 years back into the past. Ironically, when this industry would have been in its very nascent form in Japan, you know, there would have been a handful of companies, and now it's still growing. You know, there are hundreds now in Tokyo. So, and the industry has really expanded, and I caught up with some people within it last year, and the options of what they're doing is changing. They're actually doing I suppose setup arrangements. So if you still pine for your long lost love, your high school sweetheart, you can find them again and set up an encounter. Wow. So it's still thriving, but I didn't know anything about it until I'd sort of gone to Japan and begun to investigate it. What did strike me, though, when I was first reading it, was that it sounded remarkably similar to the hotel divorces that used to occur in England, in Evelyn Waugh's divorce novels of the 1930s, where you could hire an actress or a model and be seen entering a hotel and provide grounds for divorce. So it's the same use of the adult system. And the more I looked at it, the more I saw it in instances all around the world. The French write romantic comedies about it. I've been told just by people I'd spoken to that it can crop up in American politics.
Interesting.
Yes, it's so actually. What fascinated me about it was that it was not merely a Japanese phenomenon. So the novel took 10 years to write, and it's very and it's very much seen through a prism of Japanese history and culture. And I wanted to spend a lot of time researching. I wanted to be really I wanted the book to be authentic and to write with integrity. So I spent a lot of time on that. But the study of love itself has a more global resonance. And so a lot of the themes, as you've really pointed out when we spoke, are universal and related.
Yes, for sure. Well, okay, and tell us about going to Japan. It is really, the setting is, it is beautiful, it is immersive, but it is also, some of it is that in this time of lack of travel, it's, like on the one hand, this is a book about murder, so it's and even the parts that are about love, because you tell us on the first page what's coming, are somewhat less romantic than they are. And on the other hand, I think I want to go there right now, because it's this sort of armchair travel because we can't travel in real life. Tell us about that aspect of research, going there and recreating that experience on the page.
Well, I went to Japan on several occasions over several years. I actually won an anthropological award for my work on the position of women in modern Japanese society, which funded.
Wait, you were doing that before you were writing this novel, or at the same time?
Right. It was at the same time. It was right at the beginning.
Amazing.
I was doing a master's in creative writing, actually, and I won this Toshiba studentship, and it's normally for postgraduate anthropologists. I think I'm probably the first novelist they've awarded it to. I don't know if they regret that or not.
I'm sure they don't. Look what you did with it. In fact, I feel like it's two birds, one stone.
Well, and also, the more I began to think about it, the more I thought, writers are anthropologists, actually, because we have to immerse ourselves so deeply into cultures and worlds, but also remain a little bit distant and, to write about them and convey their sort of key complexities. But I digress. When I spent time in Japan, I actually visited every location in the novel. So the country itself and all of the cities and the places are characters in their own right. I really, and I suppose I was quite self-indulgent in this, in that I set the book where I wanted to go, where I wanted to be. I love the coast. So, that's why Rina and Sumiko's family home is on the coast. Rina is the mother figure and the murder victim in this story, and Sumiko is one of the main narrators, her daughter, who grows up never knowing how her mother died. So and Tokyo was such a fascinating setting and character, really, and I spent a lot of time walking it.
I can tell.
Yes, so Rina is a photographer, and I spent a lot of time walking the city with my camera, and and trying to see it through her eyes. And I also, because it's set within the Japanese justice system, I spend a lot of time working with Japanese lawyers and prosecutors to understand Japanese law and the way the criminal process works. I was actually made a member of the British Japanese Law Association for my work in Japanese law on this book.
So no wonder it took you 10 years.
It was a very deep dive.
Yeah. It was totally worth it. It was totally worth it. And I can tell it reads that way. It is very, it feels like international travel. It has that feeling of noticing everything. Are you a photographer?
I am now. I think I wasn't as serious photographer as I am now. I had to really apply myself to it for this book, and also talk to a lot of professional photographers and become familiar with the processes of the darkroom and the physicality of developing a photograph, which we so rarely get these days because it's all digital. So I mean, that was another reason I set the past story back in the 90s. I wanted to live in this pre-digital world, and I think film photography is fascinating and so beautiful, and when photographers talk about developing in their darkrooms, they rhapsodize about the intimacy of the process. So I really wanted to capture that. It was just such a fantastic medium. Too interesting to let go, really.
Well, and it plays such an important role in the book, and that had me thinking about the difference between using pictures versus using words to tell a story or to commit things to memory. And I was thinking while I was reading it, I wonder if she's a photographer, and I wonder if she has a preference. Like if it is easier, if you feel like it is truer or easier for you to do one or the other, or you like the marriage of them.
I do like the marriage. I'm probably more prose dominant. Actually, definitely. It's my chosen medium. I think I really love poetry. The precision of it, and so I really wanted in this book to make every word earn its place. Everything has to have a real resonance and just ripple outward. So yes, I probably do prefer prose, but photography is, I think it can be extraordinary. But it's executed by better people than me.
Well, okay, and while we're on that topic, will you show everyone the other cover and tell us about that? Yes.
So these are the two covers of What's Left of Me Is Yours. This is the hardback and the paperback. And this is a self-portrait by my favorite Japanese photographer, Miki Takahashi. And she does extraordinary work. And as you can see, it's a double exposure. So she's sort of transposed this picture of herself onto this wonderful foliage, which for me was so evocative of Shizuoka and Shimoda and the coastal town where Rina is from. And it's extraordinary, this picture, because she even has the same haircut as Rina, right down to the sort of dyed tips at the end. And I actually contacted Miki on Instagram and asked if she would give Doubleday and I permission to use it for the cover, and she said she would be delighted, which resulted in much screaming on my part.
But because it's almost like an epigraph. It's a really remarkable thing to put at the beginning of the book.
She's such a wonderful photographer. I strongly urge you to look at her work. It really fits in so much with the spirit, I think, of Rina, and what I was trying to capture. So this means a great deal to me. And then the paperback cover is actually also a homage, with the homage to Miki and her work, with the woman's face in Tokyo, the city, and the person becoming one. Why that.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's a beautiful cover. They did a beautiful job. Actually, as I have this question so much later, but as long as we're looking at the cover, did you pick the title?
Yes, we did.
Yes. I mean, I asked because I have written 4 novels untitled 0 novels. Do you want to tell us about the title then?
Yeah, and I do actually, because that was not its original title.
Oh, interesting.
Oh yeah. So I did come up with it, but under some duress. It was actually right at the at the end of the editing process. I think you would do 2 weeks to just signing off on the book, and someone from marketing was looking at the original title, and she just said, "I hate this. I hate it."
What was it?
It was The Sentence.
Oh, that seems like a great title. But I mean, I love this one too. But yes, marketing people, that's their job.
Yeah, and I remember, of course, this was, London to New York. So I wrote her like an essay in the middle of the night about why The Sentence was the most perfect. And all of the multiple meanings throughout the book.
Right.
And then they just came back straight away and were like, "We don't care, we hate it."
Fair enough.
I was like, oh.
Okay.
So I had to come up with another title that worked at speed, and then write it into the book, because that is the way my titles. I mean, I know this is only my first book, but it's the way my titles generally work. Short stories for chapters, they have to be written in.
Yeah.
So yes, I had to break the ending of a scene that I was quite attached to and insert this in, and also find a title that they liked but that resonated in similar ways. I think this title applies to every single character within the novel, in that they're all left with part of a person, but also I think that experience of life, and the damage it can inflict, or the baggage it can leave you with, and when you decide to love someone, you're trusting them with your whole self. So what's left of me is yours. The person I am now is yours. Applies to simply everyone in the book. So I had to find that, and it was yes, well, the last title I came up with, but I probably came up with 200 in the space of 2.
All right, well, you did a good job.
Thank you.
I totally buy it. I do. Well, and it made for a really interesting cover, which, because it's longer, if it had been a much shorter one, it would have been a different cover. So it's like, it's a bonus. You win at the end. All right, so let's talk nitty gritty. So one of the things that's really interesting about this book is, on the one hand, it's a love story, and you get really caught up in the love story, and on the other hand, we know how it ends. Did you know all along you were going to tell us the ending on page 1?
I did, actually. I did. The prologue was the first part of the novel that I wrote, and it stayed. It stayed in that form throughout.
Interesting. I love it when that happens.
Well, yes, I was really, really attached to it. I had to fight for it quite a lot to keep it, but I'm really glad I did. I think it's probably, it was the DNA of the book in a way, and I wanted to have that circular structure, and for the novel to be, as much about why and how as it is about who,
And that's exactly what I was going to say. It shifts. It's still a mystery. It just shifts what that mystery is. Did you know going in that this book was going to be half third person, half first, half past, half present, half love story, half mystery, all of this like toggling back and forth?
I didn't, actually. I didn't know it was going to be first person and third person. I mean, the voice that came to me first was Sumiko's. So I wondered, if there had been a child and this was her mother's history, how would she have been raised in Tokyo, particularly through the 90s and up into the present day? How would a family have dealt with that? would they have kept it from her? And, you know, in the book, they certainly have, and she has to go in search of her own history. And so her voice was very clear right from the beginning. So I knew she was going to be first person. But the other characters, Rena, I had to build her from the ground up. Kaitaro, he kept talking to me in the first person. I could not shut him up. That sounds like a very strange thing to say.
No.
Yeah, because I needed him to talk to me in order to write the book, but he simply couldn't be in first because, you know, it would have conflicted with Sumiko's narrative. And it just didn't, you know, it didn't serve for him to be in first. It works better for him in the third. But then, you know, the book's also a palimpsest in that there are many different kinds of documents, there are photographs, there are video interviews, and, you know, you can see him being interviewed. So there are many different ways that he gets to talk, just not perhaps the front on address that he
Yes.
issued.
Well, it's like he loses the privilege because
Yes.
because he commits this really horrible crime. Although one of the things that really struck me while I was reading it is that for many of the people in the book, and really like the tone of the book, the greater crime is not so much the murder as this industry is like, where do you want the reader to fall on that? Do we forgive him, basically, and or like do we put that blame on the legal system, or on this industry in general, rather than, you know, than on what has happened,
rather than an individual? It's a really interesting question. I think, you know,
I think it's yours.
well, I think just as you know, just as the novel sort of poses all these questions about love and who is culpable, it leaves the answer to the individual reader. I really wanted to do that because there's a great deal in the book about the intimate personal experience of reading. Yeah. So when the trial takes place in the 90s, at that time in the Japanese legal system, there was no jury. So the three judges would have read the documents privately in their chambers and come to their own decision about what had happened. And this is something that Sumiko, when she finally gets enough of the paperwork together to assemble the trial, this is the same experience that she has. Yeah. And there's, you know, love is very important in Japanese law. It has a great significance for sentencing, and so the decision that these people are making are extremely private. And actually, may I read you a paragraph?
I would be thrilled. I think we would all be thrilled.
I will read you. So this is what Sumiko is holding in her head just as she prepares to go through the papers. Our judicial process revolves around the issue of motive. Who, how, where, when are not as important as why. The desires that dwell in the deepest parts of the mind must be examined and proven before a sentence can be determined. Even in the most brutal of murders, the emotional state of the suspect comes to the fore. The notion of love is considered. Hatsukoi, first love. Mirin, lingering attachment. Katamoi, one-sided longing. Ashiao, mutual love. Fujai ajo, deep love. The court will evaluate the depth of love and proffer leniency accordingly. And so it is on this intangible value that a person's fate can rest. Love, which for so many is a matter of life and death.
Wow. Super interesting and really beautiful also.
Thank you. So really, it's such an intimate process that I wanted the novel to be the same for each reader. And I get a variety of responses. You know, some people really are won over by Kai and then very conflicted that they're won over by him. And all I can say to that is me too.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, my character is fictional, but I did create, you know, but I created him, and you know, he's a very complex man, and there are many reasons, and you know, in many ways, he and Rena do experience a very powerful kind of love. Yeah. It just depends. I mean, what I wanted to do with it was to see what happens to people when all of the pressure points in their life are applied, you know, in those arguments, because it's so easy for us to lose it and to go from 0 to 100. And I wanted to see what the characters would do when I did that. But I mean, you know, as to who is to blame, on one hand, all of the characters in the novel are in their own ways responsible for Rena's death, even Rena, through her choices and her actions on the day. But also, I mean, not that, you know, it's not her fault in any way.
No, of course not. Yeah.
But just in, you know, just in that we all are responsible for our actions. But the other, you know, the other group that is to blame is really humanity. And that when you look at the world in general, and you look at, you know, all of these industries that arise out of human desire, like honey trapping in general, all of the strange things that we do to each other, they arise out of, you know, human wants and needs. And where there is a desire, there will always be people willing to fulfill it for a cost. And you know, so really I wanted to look at us all as a group and the things we do and why we do. So it invites self-reflection in that way as well.
It does. I mean, it absolutely does. And I think that you know, one of it is that your book invites you to look at your own life and the extent to which you think, oh, that could never happen in my relationship, and to the extent that you have to think like, well, I mean, it certainly happens in some relationships. So, you know, why is my relationship any different? And, you know, what are the line? Like, passion as love is very close to passion as anger. And you ask that for 300 pages. And that's a really, really good and important question, I think.
Thank you. And
if anybody else has important questions, you should ask them. I just want to remind people, all of you people out there who I can't see, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A box, and I'll ask them. All right, Stephanie, sorry, tell us.
Sorry.
I know, I forgot what we were saying too before I interrupted myself to ask people questions.
No, it's quite all right. And I was going to say actually how these people in these scenarios can slip into your life is quite fascinating, because, you know, in Japan, a number of these agents are attached to private detective agencies. And so their work starts with the typical gumshoe private detective work, you know, stakeouts, you know, people asking, is my partner having an affair? And then they follow them and they suss that out, and it, you know, and they don't necessarily intervene, they just report. And, you know, just as I think people don't talk about engaging private detectives, it still does happen, and quite frequently. I mean, I think I found when I was writing this book, you know, that I would begin to talk to people about, you know, who they would hire, you know, the various services that they would engage in, you know, and I was surprised by how many people would say, oh yeah, no, I've hired a PI. Yeah.
Wow.
You
interesting.
What? Wow. What were they like? You know, and it's fast. I think it's fascinating, but it's not necessarily something that people would talk about. And also, I mean, within this industry, when talking to the agents themselves, one of them said to me that, you know, there isn't a great deal of there aren't a great deal of mental health resources, and it's not as acceptable to talk about your problems publicly, to seek help. a lot of people can feel very repressed and trapped by their own, I suppose, more public image, their public self. And so some people just need someone to talk to about their relationships. He and maybe this is a rose-tinted look at it, but he was telling me basically that he felt like a psychologist a lot of the time.
Sure. I mean, you must. So interesting. So interesting. All right. So you did lots of research, you did lots of travel, you talked to lots of people, you interviewed lots of people. What about the writing process? Tell us about the writing process and this beautiful room that you were doing it in.
Thank you. So yes, this is my study. I have a lot of my favorite books that influenced the novel up behind me, and all sorts of mementos from my travels behind me as well. And goodness, this room is normally a mess. There's normally paper all over the floor. That's how I write. I mean, I type directly onto my computer, but I make notes longhand, just on sheets and sheets of paper. And with this book, as you mentioned, it shifts back and forth in time. It does so quite quickly, in an almost filmic sort of way. And because of that, it was very complicated to structure. So I actually, halfway through the novel, set it all out. I laid it all out across my living room floor and walked it. And that was how I put it together, because there are so many different strands and you almost feel like you need to pull them all taut to make them work. And I could only do that by sort of physically seeing them all laid out.
Did you write all of one thread? Did you write all the first person and then all the third, or did you write it back and forth?
No, actually, I wrote it back and forth, and I did this, what seems like to me now, what seems like a crazy thing, which is that I wrote the parts that interested me most. So I didn't write it in chronological order. I didn't write any of the strands in order. I wrote what interested me. I literally followed my nose, and then when I'd assembled a mass of prose, put it together, and then started to pull on all of the threads. And then I spent time finessing in each of the chapters and making sure that each of the notes align, and there were moments of tension, and that the rhythms were exactly as I wanted them to be.
Yeah.
That sort of later, but initially, just in order to get into the book, because it was such a daunting project. Actually, it was such a hugely daunting project, such a complex task, that I had to have no constraints when I was writing initially. I think otherwise it would have been too frightening.
So then, and then you wrote it all out on pages and
yeah.
them out, and you're like mapped them out basically.
Yeah. So I mapped everything out, and once I'd done the mapping and I decided on a 5-act structure, and I knew roughly which chapters were going to be in each act, then I could start to really do the proper sort of editing work. But I did actually also have a couple of months where I would put the book away, and also, and perhaps at this point, go back to research. It was really interesting because I would research and write. It was I never did all of the research and then start writing. I don't think you could. I think if one did that, one would be researching forever. Yes. And so then as I discovered things, in Japan, particularly when Rina is killed, they have a system called forgotten parties, and the relatives of victims are known as forgotten parties, largely because in the past they were not told any details of the outcome of the trial. This was largely to protect the perpetrators, and it's swung in the opposite direction now. That I think as a relative, you can be in court, you can have a lawyer to represent you, you can cross-examine the perpetrator if you wish to. So the whole system has evolved. But when Rina dies, her family are shut out, and for Sumiko, there's no easy way for her to get hold of her own history. And so that actually became a really integral part of the book and her characterization, because I was talking to lawyers and, initially I thought, well, there's a lot of ground to cover. Let's just go from A to B. Let's get her the material quickly. And the lawyers I was speaking to were just saying, no, that would never be possible. No, under no circumstances. No. So I was like, oh, okay. So you have to work with your research. You have to do a lot. You have to shift. So it was a very organic process.
Wow. It's so frustrating when the people who you go to for facts tell you that this thing that you want to make up can't happen, and you're kind of like, yeah, but I made the whole thing up. Don't tell me I can't do that. But then that's what they do. They say you cannot. What were the hardest bits to write?
Definitely the murder scene, because I was super attached to everyone involved by that point. And that was very, very hard. And just how each of the characters gets to that point, how they, particularly it's highly emotional because the tension and the anger and all the emotions are ratcheting up and up and up. And so there's a huge amount of energy. It took a lot out of me to write that scene. And I think there's still a lot of energy in the book at that point.
Yeah. Oh, I bet it's hard to read for the same reason. And in that same way where I feel like we're waiting. It's not that you don't know it's coming, and yet it still kind of wrecks you, which is,
well, yes. And particularly because you're right, particularly because it's a scene that the reader will have imagined and, is being asked to question and put together such a lot. So, I mean, there's a huge amount of anticipation. It also has to, be very surprising.
Yeah. And it is.
Thank you.
Yes. I just want to tell everybody, if you haven't read this book yet, and I guess people haven't because they're not asking questions, and that's because they haven't read the book. They're going to go and read the book soon. It makes a great holiday present. It doesn't sound like a super loving holiday present, but actually it is. It's like exactly the kind of book that you want to sit by the fire and tell your family to leave you alone so that you can read, which honestly, who doesn't want that for Christmas? Before, I'm mindful of the fact that it is 1:45 in the morning and you need to go to bed. Do you want to tell us, though, before we let you go, are you working on something? What are you doing next? What happens next? Besides raising a baby, which is going to take some time.
Yes. How many children do you have, may I ask?
Just the one. And she takes a lot of time. She's not 5 months old anymore, so that's how I know.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Yes. No, the baby has absolutely taken over everything, including my mind. Yes. I used to have the novel in there. She's just shoved it out. Yeah. Well, I'm from Singapore. I'm half Indian, half British, and my Indian grandmother was in the jungles in Malaysia in the Second World War. She was in Malaysia in the Second World War when the Japanese army invaded. So Singapore and Malaysia became colonies of Japan. My mother was actually born on Tokyo time. That's on her birth certificate. She has a Japanese birth certificate because she was born during the occupation. So my grandmother was forced to leave her home and hide in the rubber plantations of Malaysia as the army advanced, and she remained there for a couple of years, and she met a Japanese soldier and taught him English. And what, I was very close to my grandmother, and what I love about, there are many things I loved about her life, but it's the trajectory that fascinates me, because she complained continually more about this than about the war, that she hadn't been able to take her exams, that she had remained sort of unqualified and uneducated for so long. This really bothered her, and it was only actually after she had her children that she took herself back to school and then went to university and she studied law. So it's no coincidence that Sumiko is a lawyer in this novel. And she became the first female partner of the largest international law firm in Singapore. Wow. And she was an incredible woman and a matriarch. and I'm just fascinated. And she really, you know, she had 3 children, she raised them, and had this incredible career, and she lived through so much, and it shaped her in so many interesting ways. And so I would love to try and weave that into a novel, I think.
Yes. Oh, I mean, you must. What a great book. What a great novel.
Thank you.
I
Well,
can't
yeah.
wait to read it.
Also quite research heavy, I fear. I'm a little afraid of it, I have to say.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think the word you used before was daunting, and that's how it is at the beginning. But then you'll get into it, and hopefully you'll get some sleep, and maybe some novels take a really long time, but some novels very quickly. Even if it's 10 more years, I will be here waiting to read it.
Thank you so much. Have you had a novel that has written quickly?
I have had one novel that wrote quickly. Um, and it was the only one. And it gives me hope that it can be done, but
Yes.
it's not a thing I have managed to replicate since. And in
Yeah.
fact, the one that just came out in June took me 3.5 years, which was a very long time. And then of course I started the next one as that one was in production. So I started it on March 3rd of 2020, and
Oh my,
yeah. So it's, I think that's going to be a really not quick process either. Because
well, what a time to start writing as
time.
well. The
Yeah,
time.
yeah. Well, and I was thinking about you because you traveled to do this book, and all of the people who have to, and I mean, I traveled to write my last book. Sometimes the research can't happen in your bedroom, and
No,
what's going to happen to all of those books for half a decade here at least,
yeah.
that are getting backed up in this pipeline of, oh well, I couldn't write that, or I changed the plot because I couldn't do the research. It's going to be super interesting to see what happens.
Yes. And whether people, how much of what we're all experiencing people include, because yes, it's a really difficult question whether we want to read about the pandemic as well as live through it.
I know it's a very, very interesting question, and it will be interesting, I think, for years to come.
Yes, I
Yes.
agree.
Yes. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us. I want to encourage everybody to go to Magic City Books and buy books. Books make really the best holiday presents. And your local independent bookstore, if it turns out that you are not near Magic City Books, will also be super, super happy to have you and to host you, and to have you buy books there. And Stephanie, it was just an absolute pleasure to meet you. We so appreciate your being up in the middle of the night talking to us.
Oh, thank you so much for speaking with me, Laurie. It's an absolute pleasure. It's been really delightful to be here, and I so appreciate your taking the time. I'm an enormous fan of your work. As you know, I think everyone, please buy Laurie's books for Christmas as well. They are phenomenal, as I know. But it's been a real privilege. So talk to you. Thank you.
It has been a delight. Thank you tons. Thank you, Pat, and thank you, Magic City. Next book, I can't wait. Okay, but in the meantime, get some sleep.
Oh, thank you. I will try. She may be asleep right now.
Yeah, but she's going to be up in like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
All right. Bye, all.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.